41 minutes into the year's most highly anticipated political showdown, Gavin Newsom went completely silent. It wasn't merely a brief pause or a mental pivot during an argument. He looked down at his lectern, caught the moderator's eye, and uttered the exact phrase that would dominate every news feed across the nation. "I'd like to move on." Donald Trump tilted his head, offered a smirk, and answered, "No." Here is the precise sequence of how that moment arrived. Fox News had engineered their New York studio specifically for this atmospheric clash. Two stands were positioned 40 feet apart, a live audience of 400 attendees, and an estimated 62 million spectators tuned in from living rooms, medical waiting zones, local salons, and corner diners where the channel permanently stays on Fox until a patron demands a change. And nobody ever demands a change. Gavin Newsom walked out first. He appeared exactly as he always does on camera, the calculated look of a politician who invested nearly an hour ensuring he seemed utterly effortless. The navy suit was tailored, the signature hair was perfect, and the practiced grin was the exact same weapon that had propelled him from San Francisco's mayoral seat to the Sacramento governor's mansion. If the evening proved successful, that identical smile was meant to carry him straight into a 2028 presidential campaign launch. He opened the battle exactly according to his team's playbook. Looking directly at Trump, he gestured with an open palm and delivered the exact talking point his communications director had crafted mid-flight. "Standing across from me is a man legally held liable for fraud by a New York court, yet he believes he should lecture the rest of us on honesty. But I am here. I showed up. Let's converse." The crowd delivered the polite, moderate applause he anticipated. Newsom absorbed it like oxygen, validation of his own ingrained self-belief. For the ensuing 90 seconds, he executed his political craft flawlessly. He rapidly fired off statistics. California's ranking as the globe's fifth biggest economy, the massive surge in tech employment, heavy green energy funding. He slammed Trump's tariffs as a grocery penalty and mocked his border raids as mere theatrical stunts for the press. His delivery was absolutely impeccable. The rhythm was completely engineered. Every single sentence dropped on a precise downbeat, mirroring a man who had extensively rehearsed his performance in a mirror and deeply admired the reflection. Trump remained planted, both hands gripping the lectern. He offered no interruptions. He did not shake his head. He did not reach for a glass of water. He observed Newsom much like a driver watching a stranger steal their parking space. Patient, slightly entertained, waiting for the charade to end to deliver reality. Once Newsom paused, Trump allowed a heavy 3-second silence to hang. In a room wired with 40 live microphones, 3 seconds is an eternity. "Are you finished?" he asked. He didn't pause for a reply. "Because I want to discuss a dining establishment. A very specific restaurant, Gavin. One you know intimately well." "November 6th, 2020, Trump stated. The delivery was entirely flat, identical to an accountant reading a ledger. Zero theatrics, merely the numbers. The French Laundry, Yountville, California. You sat down for a meal alongside 12 individuals. Power lobbyists? Political strategists? The CEO of the California Medical Association sat immediately to your right. His personal lobbyist flanked your other side. $350 a plate, and that excludes the wine, ignores the Wagyu beef upgrades, and skips whatever deals you brokered between dishes." Trump paused, locking eyes with the audience. "Nobody wore a mask. The doors were sealed shut because your gathering was excessively rowdy. The waitstaff had to slide the glass dividers closed to stop you from annoying the remaining patrons. That is how boisterous your party was. You were having the time of your life." He let the visual linger in the air. Then, his tone shifted, dropping deeper, losing all volume. "Now I want to tell you about a woman who missed out on that dinner." Down in the fourth row of the studio, a silver-haired woman sat up rigidly. She had no idea this was coming. Nobody on staff had warned her. Her name is Rosa Delgado. She operated an eatery named Rosa's Kitchen in Sacramento, California, not Yountville. Sacramento, your very capital city, Gavin, the city where you go to work. Rosa launched that restaurant in 1997. She prepared meals 7 days a week for 24 uninterrupted years. She brought up 2 children working behind that counter. Her daughter, Sophia, was a sophomore at UC Davis when your lockdowns hit. Trump abandoned his notes, piercing the camera lens directly. Rosa did everything you ordered her to do. She installed the plexiglass shields. She purchased outdoor patio sets. She slashed her workforce from a dozen to 4. She submitted every required permit and obeyed every single rule you drafted. And you drafted countless rules, Gavin. You instituted so many confusing regulations that Rosa had to hire legal counsel merely to figure out which ones were active on which days. Then you banned outside dining completely, and Rosa lost everything. 24 years eradicated. Not due to her own failure, but because you decreed she wasn't allowed to host 5 patrons on a sidewalk during the exact same week you dined with 12. Newsom leaned into his microphone, his tone polished and slick, the exact cadence of a politician relying on rehearsed muscle memory after answering the identical question before. I have addressed the French Laundry dinner openly and frequently. I appeared on nationwide broadcasts. I labeled it an error. I claimed total accountability. That chapter is definitively closed. Trump offered a slow, deliberate nod, the reaction of a man who anticipated that exact PR defense. You apologized for the meal, Gavin. I watched it. A highly polished, very nice apology. But you never apologized to Rosa. You never dialed her number. You never traveled through Sacramento to stare at the vacant building where her restaurant used to operate. You apologized directly to the television cameras, never to her. He wasn't done dismantling the incident. But here is the part that truly gets under my skin, and I believe it should bother you too. He pivoted toward the live seats. While Rosa's daughter struggled to stream UC Davis lectures on a cracked smartphone display because the governor completely locked down the university campus, his own children attended private academies, in person, surrounded by educators, peers, and a functioning cafeteria. He ordered every public education facility in California to lock its doors, then shipped his own kids elsewhere. And when a journalist questioned him about it, do you recall his exact response? He labeled himself a Zoom parent. A Zoom parent. His children were physically sitting in a classroom, yet he had the audacity to call himself a Zoom parent. Trump physically shook his head, a genuine unscripted gesture reflecting pure disbelief that bypassed his filter. 2/3 of Californian pupils currently fail to meet basic mathematics standards. Over 50% cannot pass English evaluations. Those are his own statistics directly from his state's testing system. An entire generation of children was left behind, but his family was perfectly fine. They enjoyed desks, teachers, and playgrounds, just not the public ones everyone else was forced to use. He let the devastating truth breathe, then pointed directly into the live crowd. Rosa is sitting here tonight. Row 4. 400 heads instantly whipped around. Rosa Delgado offered no wave. She did not stand up. She remained seated, pressing her hands together tightly in her lap, staring directly forward. It was the hardened gaze of someone who had hauled an immense burden for a massive duration and was finally told they could drop it, yet couldn't entirely process the relief. Your daughter had to drop out of UC Davis, correct, Rosa? Rosa offered a single nod. She abandoned her education to find labor because the restaurant funding her tuition ceased to exist, because Gavin Newsom mandated its closure, and then he went out for a luxury dinner. If you are among the millions of Americans who demand that the lawmakers must actually obey their own laws, you already understand the core of this narrative. But we are just warming up. If this is the exact truth you have been waiting to hear someone state loudly, hit that subscribe button right now because the next revelation is significantly worse. Trump reached beneath his podium, extracting a solitary piece of paper. He brandished it the way a person reveals a lost, vindicating receipt pulled from a winter coat. Absolute proof of being correct all along. $33 billion, he enunciated deliberately, repeating the figure for maximum impact. $33 billion. That is the exact amount of capital stolen from California's Employment Development Department during COVID. Stolen, Gavin. Not lost in a spreadsheet error. Looted by criminals. By international crime rings. Do you want to hear exactly who pocketed the cash? A Chinese state-sponsored hacking faction designated Advanced Persistent Threat 41. Their nickname is Wicked Panda. That isn't a joke. That is their official moniker. Wicked Panda. They siphoned billions from California's unemployment grid, and your administration did absolutely nothing to stop them. Newsom retaliated rapidly. Every single state in this nation suffered EDD fraud during the pandemic. This was a systemic, nationwide crisis fueled by loose federal parameters set by the prior administration. My office responded with aggressive action, We recruited a former federal prosecutor, froze suspect accounts, and recovered over $1 billion. It was a highly calculated answer, technically accurate, the exact kind of rhetoric that survives a standard press conference where reporters nod and quickly move to the next topic. However, Trump wasn't a reporter and he refused to move on. Every territory suffered fraud. You are right about that, Gavin. But only one single state lost $33 billion. Only yours. Do you want to understand the reason why? He raised a secondary document. Your Labor Secretary, Julie Su, received prior warnings. The state auditor alerted her that the system was incredibly vulnerable years before COVID even hit. LexisNexis, one of the premier global identity verification firms, volunteered to patch the gaping holes. Not for $1 billion contract, not for $100 million, for zero cost. They offered pro bono assistance, Gavin, and she declined. Do you know what her justification was? She claimed strict verification protocols would disproportionately hurt Black and brown Californians. Therefore, in a misguided attempt to protect minorities, she permitted international criminals to rob them totally blind. And your response was to promote her. You exported Julie Su to Washington and told the president she should command the entire United States Department of Labor. He dropped the page and instantly retrieved a third. Do you want to comprehend how awful the situation became? Your EDD distributed payouts to inmates sitting in state prisons. Criminals lounging in California jail cells collected unemployment checks. The system actively approved a payout to an applicant officially named Poopy Britches. That is not a punchline. That is a verified name on an officially cleared claim in the state of California. Poopy Britches secured a payday, while a Chinese government-linked hacker syndicate called Wicked Panda walked away with $26 billion out of the total $33 billion. $26 billion vanished overseas, financing drug cartels, human trafficking rings, and active operations against the United States. Your unemployment infrastructure essentially bankrolled America's enemies. Down in the fourth row, Rosa Delgado's hands shifted from her lap to the armrests. She gripped them with immense pressure now, triggered not by rage but by traumatic memory. She had submitted her own jobless application in March 2021, the exact week she shuttered her restaurant. She meticulously filled out every form. She attached every required document. Yet the system arbitrarily blocked her claim. She dialed the EDD hotline every single morning at precisely 8:00 a.m. for 4 consecutive months. She never reached a human operator. 0 times. The phone would ring, trigger a recorded prompt, and immediately sever the connection. She attempted contact 119 times. She kept a rigorous tally in a notebook, falsely believing a bureaucrat would eventually demand evidence of her diligence, and she wanted to be prepared. Nobody ever asked. Trump intuitively understood this dynamic. His next strike bypassed Newsom entirely, beaming straight into the lenses targeting 62 million Americans on their couches. Chinese hackers secured their payouts within 48 hours. Rosa waited 4 agonizing months and never received a single callback, not one. She dialed 100 times, speaking exclusively to automated machines. But Poopy Britches sailed right through the security checkpoint. He abandoned the documents, planting his palms flat on the podium. And here is the ultimate insult. When the dust settled and the massive fraud was exposed, every single other state that accepted federal unemployment loans settled their debts. All of them. 21 states borrowed those funds. 20 successfully repaid the money so their local businesses wouldn't get slammed with higher tax penalties. You completely failed to do so. California currently owes the federal treasury billions. And who absorbs that punishment? Not you. California business owners. They are actively paying triple the standard federal unemployment levy right now. $126 per employee instead of $42. Because you took a loan, permitted thieves to loot it, and forwarded the invoice to the exact people who were already fighting for survival. He glared directly at Newsom. That is your version of California, Gavin. Criminals receive paychecks, working citizens get a dial tone, and the invoice is shoved onto whoever remains. Trump allowed the heavy atmosphere to stabilize before sharply changing direction. It was the maneuver of a man seamlessly expanding a targeted strike into a massive bombardment. Let's review exactly who still resides in California, because that list gets noticeably shorter every single year. He required 0 notes for this barrage. 1.7 million residents have fled your borders since 2020. That isn't an estimation. That is raw Census Bureau data. 1.7 million. Do you comprehend what 1.7 million citizens looks like? That equates to the total populace of Phoenix, Arizona. Your governance managed to bleed out an entire Phoenix. He began tallying the corporate casualties on his fingers. Chevron, gone. Relocating headquarters to Texas. Tesla, gone. SpaceX, gone. Oracle, gone. Hewlett-Packard, gone. Charles Schwab, gone. In-N-Out Burger, Gavin, In-N-Out. A foundational California staple. 77 years anchored in the state, and they shifted their corporate base to Tennessee. You alienated a burger empire that functioned basically as a religion in your state. He elevated his hand once more. U-Haul publishes an annual index detailing which states feature more trucks exiting than arriving. California has occupied dead last for 6 consecutive years. 6 years, Gavin. More rental trucks flee California than any other territory in America. Citizens aren't traveling to Texas for a weekend vacation. They are packing up their furniture. He stripped all remaining amusement from his pitch. And why exactly wouldn't they leave? A standard residential property in California currently demands $874,000. That is the median price. Not a luxury estate, a basic house. You force them to pay double the national average for electricity at 32 cents per kilowatt. Your localized gas tax alone will strike $2 per gallon by next year. $2 of pure tax before a single drop hits the tank. Forbes magazine ranked California dead last for commercial viability for the 14th consecutive year. 14th, Gavin. Meaning every single year you've held the governor's seat, California remained the absolute worst state in America to launch a business. Every single year. 0 exceptions. He locked onto Newsom. When you claimed the governor's chair, California boasted a $97 billion budget overflow. $97 billion. Do you realize what your ledger shows today? A crater deficit somewhere between 50 and 70 billion, depending entirely on whose counting methods you trust. And given your track record on basic accounting, I sincerely doubt anyone possesses the authentic data. He paused, lowering his volume. Rosa evacuated too. Were you aware of that? She relocated to Reno. She currently occupies a single-bedroom apartment and labors at a casino diner she has 0 equity in. She packed up her culinary legacy, 24 years of Sacramento history, and bolted. She didn't flee to escape the weather. She fled because you made it financially impossible to survive in the state where she constructed her life. He re-engaged the cameras. Citizens don't abandon their homes willingly. They flee because leadership creates a toxic environment. If Rosa's trauma resonates with you the way it impacts this live room, do me a favor. Share this broadcast with someone who needs a wake-up call. Forward it to anyone who recalls California's golden era. Because Gavin Newsom is terrified of what I am about to drop next. The impending statements entirely shattered the studio's climate. Previously, the barrage heavily focused on policy failures, broken systems, and raw economics. What followed was a precision strike directly targeting Newsom's hand-picked inner circle. Let's analyze your staff, Gavin. Let's specifically examine Dana Williamson. Newsom's chin subtly elevated, a microscopic tell of a politician bracing for a hit while attempting to feign ignorance. Dana Williamson, your chief of staff, the individual steering your operations every single day, slapped with 23 federal indictments, 23 counts, banking fraud, wire fraud. She embezzled $225,000 from an inactive political fund. She fabricated $1.7 million in corporate write-offs on her IRS filings. $1.7 million, Gavin. She acquired a $15,000 Chanel purse using stolen capital. She blew $170,000 on a lavish birthday excursion to Mexico. And this was the apex advisor stationed right outside your door, dictating the deployment of California's money. He let the luxury handbag reference hang heavily in the air. $15,000. Rosa Delgado spent 3 months grinding to earn that amount. When the feds finally caught her, do you remember your official statement? You claimed you would deeply miss her insight, tenacity, and big heart. A big heart. That is your official description of a criminal financing Chanel bags with illicit funds. Yet Rosa, who labored 7 days a week for 24 years without stealing a single dime, received absolutely nothing from the governor's office. Rosa was awarded a locked EDD phone line. Newsom aggressively stepped to his microphone, and for the absolute first time all night, his vocal tone projected a raw, unscripted hostility. "I'm going to stop you right there. Dana Williamson acted entirely on her own. I have routinely broadcasted my demand for absolute ethical perfection from my staff. But I refuse to absorb morality lectures on integrity from a man whose personal legal counsel sat in federal lockup, whose campaign manager sat in federal lockup, and who currently stands on this stage as a legally convicted felon preaching about other people's crimes." The studio dynamic visibly shifted. Newsom's loyalists found their vocal cords. Sporadic but intense cheering erupted from the left flank of the audience. It wasn't massive, but it was aggressive. For a fleeting 5-second window, the debate momentum wavered. Newsom braced his posture, his jaw firmly locked in place. He embodied a warrior who finally located the street fight he anticipated. Trump didn't flinch. He waited effortlessly for the clapping to completely fade. When he resumed, his delivery was a terrifying, icy whisper. "My attorney violated the law and served time in a prison cell. That is the definition of accountability. Your top lieutenant violated the law and you declared her irreplaceable. That is the fundamental difference, Gavin. When my crew fails, they face a cell. When your crew fails, you memorialize their big heart." The applause from the left instantly evaporated. "But since you decided to introduce the topic of integrity, let us evaluate your spouse." A massive hush dropped over the crowd. "Jennifer Siebel Newsom. The Federal Justice Department is actively investigating her for tax fraud." Those are your own admissions, Gavin. You personally briefed the press. You branded it a partisan hit job. Perhaps it is. I genuinely don't know. But here is the verified reality. He brandished a fresh piece of evidence. Her charitable entity, the Representation Project, absorbed upwards of $800,000 in contributions from mega corporations heavily lobbying your administration. PG&E, Etant, Comcast, Kaiser Permanente. Monopolies requiring executive favors from California's chief are aggressively writing checks to the governor's wife. Furthermore, she has personally banked $2.3 million in wages from that exact nonprofit since 2011. He discarded the sheet. However, my absolute favorite is Panera-gate. You vividly recall Panera-gate, Gavin. You signed a bill aggressively boosting fast food baseline pay to $20 hourly. Every single restaurant within state lines was forced to comply, with one glaring exception: Panera Bread. Panera secured a magical loophole. And the most prominent Panera operator in the state coincidentally happens to be your personal golfing buddy and major financial donor, Greg Flynn. He faced the viewers directly. Draconian rules for Rosa. Golden exemptions for his friends. Rosa faced a forced $20 minimum while sliding into bankruptcy. Panera bypassed the pain entirely because the owner enjoys tea times with the executive. The onslaught continued. You obliterated $37 billion combating California's street crisis. $37 billion. The net result? Homelessness exploded by 31%. Upwards, Gavin. Not downwards. Upwards. Your state harbors 12% of the national populace, yet warehouses a third of the nation's unhoused. 1 out of every 3 vagrants in America occupies your sidewalks. Your own auditor confessed you possessed 0 tracking mechanisms to trace where the funds actually went. $37 billion, and you cannot physically articulate to the taxpayers what goods or services were procured. You cannot explain it because you fundamentally do not know. He paused, layering a trace of pity into his delivery. Back when you ran San Francisco as mayor, you swore an oath to eradicate the street vagrancy. That was the year 2004. 22 years in the past. You continue to swear the exact same oath. The encampments persist, the needles persist, the tragedy persist. Annually, you burn more tax capital and the nightmare magnifies. At a specific juncture, the debate shifts from whether the policy is bombing to whether the failure is actually the intentional policy. He precisely squared the documents on the wood, the calculated tell of a prosecutor finalizing the kill shot and maintaining a neat record. Let us calculate the grand total. $33 billion looted from the EDD. $37 billion torched on encampments with absolutely nothing to show. An executive assistant facing federal fraud charges. A spouse dodging IRS inquiries. A mega donor handed a sweetheart labor exemption. 1.7 million fleeing taxpayers. A treasury completely inverted from a 97 billion surplus to a 70 billion deficit. He locked onto Newsom. And you want a promotion? This was the promised climax. At the 41-minute mark, the studio rigging felt blinding, or perhaps the contrast heavily shadowed Newsom's features. Gavin Newsom stared strictly down at his podium. Meticulous notes rested there. His handlers burned 3 weeks constructing defenses, pivot lines, and counterstrikes categorized by subject matter, completely color-coordinated, complete with handwritten cues for artificial emotional reactions noted in the margins. Not a single page accounted for this level of destruction. Nothing could insulate him because a scripted defense vaporizes when the authentic reality possesses a name, a face, and occupies the fourth row staring directly at your soul, watching you struggle. He grasped his tumbler, took a sip, and placed it down. The sharp clink of crystal against the timber was the sole sound echoing in the studio. Then he addressed the moderator. "I'd like to move on." The words emerged steady but totally hollow. It echoed the tenor of a swimmer trapped in a rising tide who just felt the freezing water clear his chest. Every single soul in attendance clocked the massive tonal shift from his arrogant opening monologue 70 minutes prior. That initial voice was pure theatrical performance. This current tone was pure mathematics. The internal math dictated, every sentence I say from this point forward will exponentially worsen the damage. Trump simply tilted his head. The exact same angle from the intro, the identical smirk, yet infinitely heavier. It was the expression of an operator who took significantly less joy in the execution than history would later assume he did. No. One single syllable. The room froze. You don't get to move on, Gavin. Rosa didn't get to move on. She is seated right there. She is paralyzed because her small business is a vacant shell sporting a commercial lease banner in the window. The 1.7 million expats who fled California cannot just move on because they were forced to liquidate real estate at massive deficits to reboot their lives in territories that don't penalize ambition. The household stripped of survival checks by Beijing cyber thieves cannot move on because nobody answered the ringing phones. He inhaled deeply. When he unleashed the final blow, the theatricality vanished. The aggressive brawler vanished. Only a lethal, stripped-down resonance remained. You broke California, Gavin, and you want America next. 9 devastating words. They struck with the finality of a slamming door when an occupant exits a room, and both parties silently acknowledge the departure is permanent. Newsom remained anchored to his station. He offered zero rebuttal. His right hand instinctively reached for the water glass, elevated it halfway, then returned it untouched. The faint thud of the glass carried cleanly across the silent tension of the room. The anchor glanced at both competitors, checked the timer, and stared up at his control room personnel through the glass canopy. "We'll take a break," he commanded. Not a single spectator shifted during the commercial. 0 cell phones were checked. The 400 live attendees remained locked in their seats, staring directly at the stages, desperately attempting to mentally process the massacre they just witnessed. It ceased being a political debate a long time ago. This is the exact sequence you forward to your network, not tomorrow, instantly. If you possess contacts who watched Gavin Newsom preach to America about empathy while his empire burned, flood their inboxes with this link. They deeply deserve to hear the brutal reality of what Rosa carried for 3 agonizing years. The broadcast officially concluded roughly 11 minutes later. Sure, subsequent questions were posed and secondary arguments sparked. None of it possessed an ounce of relevance. The specific clips aggressively looping across every major broadcast network that evening, dominating the next morning's news cycle, and flooding the rest of the week all stemmed entirely from those identical 41 minutes. Newsom's crisis unit unleashed a PR blast at 11:47 p.m., firing off before the candidate even exited the building. The memo dismissed Trump's assault as a reality television stunt filled with distortions designed to distract from his own record of chaos and corruption. Tellingly, it completely ignored Rosa Delgado. It sidestepped the massive EDD fraud statistics. It failed to locate the missing $37 billion in homeless funds. It failed to invalidate a single document Trump weaponized. 4 generic sentences. 0 concrete receipts. It was the ultimate confession through omission, telling you everything by what it deliberately avoided saying. Prior to midnight, a trio of cable networks had already looped the French Laundry monologue. Come sunrise, every competitor followed suit, heavily featuring the Rosa dynamic. The specific soundbite of Newsom muttering, "I'd like to move on," racked up 11 million digital views across social platforms before the sun even rose on the East Coast. Users remixed it into musical tracks. Editors spliced it alongside infamous French Laundry paparazzi shots. Cyberspace executed its prime function, isolating a supreme moment of weakness and guaranteeing it haunted the target for the rest of their natural life. 72 hours post-broadcast, a Reuters tracking poll indicated Newsom's approval rating among registered Democratic primary voters plummeted by 9 points. Not a total collapse, just 9 solid points. But exactly enough to downgrade him from the undisputed frontrunner to the runner-up slot, trailing a dull Midwestern governor who avoided controversial quotes all season, but crucially avoided a live national televised dismemberment, precisely enough to cause mega-donors to delay returning phone communications. Exactly enough to trigger his exploratory committee advisors into eagerly taking pitches from rival campaigns. A 9-point bleed is the precise audible frequency of a presidential machine fracturing, a hairline split that hasn't fully collapsed but inevitably will once gravity takes hold. The Wall Street Journal rapidly escalated the Dana Williamson corruption saga. A financial journalist initiated the deep dive immediately following the broadcast. She unearthed a trio of previously undetected corporate card swipes linked to the dead campaign treasury that the initial DOJ indictment entirely missed. Furthermore, she revealed Williamson manipulated IRS codes by claiming a Sacramento storage locker functioned as a corporate satellite branch for 2 consecutive fiscal years. That same storage unit exclusively housed her personal residential furniture. Fox News heavily cycled Rosa Delgado's segment roughly 4 separate times within 48 hours. She granted one singular appearance positioned in a chair within a Reno broadcasting facility. Her hands remained tightly interwoven in the exact same posture from row 4. The anchor questioned what exact message she would deliver to Newsom if granted direct access. Rosa deliberated extensively. The silence stretched so long the producer nearly cut to a commercial break. "I would ask him how the dinner was," she finally muttered. "That's all. I just want to know if it was worth it." On a random Tuesday evening in Reno, Nevada, Rosa Delgado sat completely immobilized at her kitchen table. The apartment was enveloped in silence. Every digital screen in the unit remained powered down. No television blared the evening news. No radio hummed with local reports. There was only the low, mechanical drone of a refrigerator laboring in the corner, and the occasional howl of the high desert wind rattling the thin glass of her single window. This was a silence born not of peace but of profound, bone-deep exhaustion. It was the quiet of a woman who had spent 24 years immersed in the chaotic symphony of a bustling commercial kitchen. The clatter of heavy ceramic plates, the sharp sizzle of eggs hitting a greased flat-top griddle, the overlapping chatter of regular customers debating local politics over black coffee, only to have that entire universe unceremoniously ripped away. The stillness was abruptly shattered by the vibration of her cellular phone buzzing against the tabletop. The caller ID flashed a familiar California area code. It was her daughter, Sophia, calling from a dormitory room in Davis. Sophia had just successfully registered back into the University of California system. That singular achievement had not come through grants or political intervention. It was bought and paid for by a young woman who had sacrificed 18 months of her youth to manual labor. Sophia had worked 2 grueling, soul-crushing minimum wage jobs, slinging espresso at a drive-thru at dawn and folding inventory in a retail stockroom until midnight. She hoarded every single dollar bill and carefully budgeted every digital paycheck to rebuild the educational foundation that a mandate had decimated. "Did you see the numbers, Mom?" Sophia's voice crackled through the tiny speaker, trembling with a mixture of disbelief, trauma, and a fierce, vindictive spark of triumph. 9 points, Mom. His poll numbers dropped 9 entire points in 3 days. Rosa withheld an immediate response. The air in the room felt incredibly thick, laden with the weight of recent history. Her eyes were not looking at the glowing screen of the phone. Instead, her entire universe had narrowed down to a single, slightly bent object she had meticulously extracted from the depths of her purse immediately upon arriving back from the television studios of New York City. It was a photograph. It was not a grand, sweeping shot of the physical building that once housed her life's work. Rather, it was a tightly framed, intimately focused snapshot of a custom, hand-painted banner. This was the exact sign that had hung prominently above the primary entrance of Rosa's kitchen for 24 solid years. It was a masterpiece of working-class pride, bold, crimson lettering painted over a stark, cream-colored canvas. In the photograph, you could clearly see where the vibrant paint had become marginally sun-faded on the far left edge, a testament to the brutal afternoon exposure of the Sacramento Valley sun. Staring at the glossy paper, Rosa was violently thrust back into the memory of her final day in business. She vividly remembered the metallic taste of sorrow in her mouth as she personally ascended a rusted ladder to detach that banner on the closing afternoon. She remembered the physical weight of the solid oak frame as it fell heavily into her arms. She had loaded it into the back of her vehicle and hauled it across town to a rental unit. It was meant to be a temporary sanctuary for her legacy. But when the reality of her Nevada migration fully set in, and her meager savings evaporated into gas station receipts and rent, the monthly fee for that storage locker became an impossible luxury. She eventually defaulted on the payment. She was forced to leave the banner behind. "Mom, are you there?" Sophia's voice broke through the reverie, tinged with a sudden spike of anxiety. Did the connection drop? Rosa blinked hard, pulling herself out of the suffocating undertow of the past. "I'm here," she replied. Her voice was barely more than a raspy whisper, as dry as the desert air outside. "Are you okay? You sound distant," Sophia pressed, the protective instincts of a child who had watched her mother lose everything bleeding into her tone. Rosa did not immediately reassure her. Instead, she placed the photograph completely flat against the table. She began tracing the white borders of the image with the pad of her right thumb. It was an incredibly precise, methodical caress. It was the exact devotion reserved for a holy relic you intend to carry directly into the grave. She touched it not because she harbored any foolish delusions that the piece of paper could magically repair her family's financial stability, but because the physical photograph served as tangible proof that the beautiful memory it depicted was authentic. "He said my name," Rosa spoke out loud. The words felt heavy and powerful on her tongue. "On national television. To his face. 62 million people heard my name." She offered no further commentary. None was fundamentally required. Certain profound truths demand zero translation or elaboration. They do not need policy white papers or public relations spin to be fully understood. They merely require someone, anyone, powerful enough, armed with a large enough microphone to finally launch them into the atmosphere where they can never be unsaid. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Sacramento, the physical ghost of her life stood completely undisturbed. The commercial storefront located precisely at 4712 Franklin Boulevard, the exact coordinates where Rosa's kitchen had faithfully pumped out cheap hot breakfast at 5 in the morning and locked its heavy deadbolts at 9 o'clock at night for nearly a quarter of a century, sat utterly desolate. The commercial lease banner had been baking in the front window for 2 agonizing years and 7 months. The property owner had ceased checking his voicemails for potential new tenants, fully aware that the commercial demand in that neighborhood had flatlined to zero. Peering inside through the layer of grime coating the plate glass, observers could still clearly spot the exact workstation where Rosa had tirelessly nourished 3 distinct generations of working-class families. They could easily see the precise, rectangular zone on the faded drywall where the county health inspector had proudly tacked the elite grade annually since the doors opened in 1997. And most hauntingly, they could observe the faded, phantom outline directly above the entrance where the custom hand-painted banner had previously hung. The exposed brick underneath that rectangular shadow was distinctly lighter than the surrounding masonry. The brutal California sun had bleached every single square inch of the building's exterior, except for the protected patch of wall that Rosa's sign had faithfully shielded for over 2 full decades of service. It was a physical testament to a reality. Certain societal scars are permanent, baked into the very foundation of a city. Specific neighborhood tables will remain vacant forever, impossible to replace, and certain names, once they are finally spoken out loud on a stage of that magnitude, will refuse to ever get quiet again.